we think the problem of catcalling or harassment is very similar to kind of hate speech or things like that, right? You can argue here saying hate speech doesn't necessarily harm anyone as well. You can have this social movement and tell people calling a black person this specific word is or something that is bad, and go to that person and talk nicely like Bunny wanted, right? But we criminalize it because like there is a harm that is caused towards that particular community, right? So we think that is a harm that is like overarching harm that is caused towards women in these particular societies when you actually catcall them or harass them or like have all these sort of misogynistic remarks, right? So we think this is why we need to actively make sure that these people feel safe, and the people who are the perpetrators know that this is something that is wrong. And even if they don't know this is something that is wrong, we think these women will feel safe against it, right? Couple of things that I'll be talking in my speech, right? But before I move on, like a couple of remarks, right? So firstly, this idea of Bunny's alternative approach, right? She wants people to unlearn sexism, and she thinks people will go and engage with them, right? Her world seems really nice, but that's not how it will happen. She's saying that under our side, all men or most men will be labeled as sexist people, and that will somehow be turning them off, right? Even if you have these movements that are social movements that are telling people catcalling is something that is wrong, they won't be just going to them and nicely saying, sir, catcalling is very wrong. Like these people will be calling all, like most men or men who are catcalling as misogynistic people or bad people. Like this will necessarily happen on both sides. We think it will be worse under their side when they will be going all out, and these socialist movements who are very who can be very radical at times will be going all out towards more men in the society, right? We think it will be better under our side when you have a legal system that will actually check whether these people were actually sexist or misogynistic, or whether these remarks warrant a punishment. These are the sort of things that we will do under our side, right? Under their side, they have like radical organizations going out and calling each and every person a misogynistic person, all these sort of things. We think under their side, they'll be putting more people off by that sort of approach. So we don't think their alternative approach is something that will necessarily help, right? So first thing, how people like politicians or religious scholars will no longer be able to actually use the loopholes in law to actually go on with the sort of misogynistic campaigns, right? We can see people like Trump or religious scholars in like conservative countries. They are able to take the benefit of these sort of things. They are able to go and like agree with misogynistic ideas and call like women lesser beings or slut shame someone on live TV because they know they will not be punished. Compared it to like hate speech, or they won't be able to call like a person of minority something because they'll be punished and they'll be reprimanded, and there are already laws existing to protect these people. So why shouldn't there be laws existing to protect women in the society when politicians will be going and confirming views of misogynistic people in society? They will be telling these misogynistic people it's okay to have these views, it's okay to catcalling someone in the society, because a politician who is running for the presidency or for parliament seat is also being misogynistic and catcalling people, right? So these are the sort of things that we want to prevent under our side. So we think this is something that is extremely important, right? So we think like even if you're going to talk about conservative countries, it's extremely important for that not be politicians or religious scholars, not allowing them to actually go on live TV and broadcast their misogynistic views. We understand that their misogynistic views or understanding of the world might not change, but at least they won't be harming people, or they won't be making people unsafe with their speeches, or they won't be confirming the views of very conservative people in the society. These very conservative people might not change on both sides. We think the point of this debate is to make sure that they won't be able to infiltrate the minds of younger people in the population by this sort of misogynistic views. They won't be able to normalize these sort of things using politicians or by religious scholars. We think this is the exclusive benefit that we have on the side, even if we are not able to change the mindset of the very conservative people, right? Secondly, we think there are harms that will be caused, right? They said they wanted to talk about dress code and whatnot in offices, stuff like that, right? We think it's extremely difficult even now, when women go into workforces, when they want to go into high positions, right? But it's something that is very casual, like the sexist remarks or catcalling them or slut shaming them in office is something that is very casual. No one can do anything about it, right? So we think even if the mindset of these people in the high levels of board of directors don't change, the one woman in there not being catcalled or not being slut shamed is a benefit that is enough, right? Even if we are able to even if we are able to criminalize, or if we are able to prosecute one person in that particular board and that woman is not actively harassed in that board, we think that's a benefit that we are okay with under our side, even if their mindsets or the way they behave doesn't necessarily change, right? So we think these sort of benefits are benefits that women in workplace will necessarily be getting under our side when they are not actively harassed on a day-to-day basis. Before I move on.
When something like this is unfortunately seen as dubious and it crowds out the issues, then people in your world like Kozilek gets more airtime on Twitter when he can brand this as being petty and angry for nothing.
Like, we don't think people, we don't think when you're talking about things like when you're talking about verbal assault or sexism, it crowds out the issue in liberal countries, right? The Bunny's last issue. We think these issues can go hand in hand. You can talk about catcalling and rape culture or things like that, because these things are essentially linked together, as you point out. When you go out and tell someone, oh yeah, sexually assault that person, or have this verbal assaults, that person feels really unsafe. The next step might be that person going and touching that person, right, or groping that person. So these are linked steps, right? So we can talk about these issues together. We don't think this is crowding out and taking the opportunity for talking about rape or other sorts of sexual assault in community. We think this is the first step that actually needs to be there, where people at the end of the day will be feeling safe, right? So we don't think it is reducing the political. We think we are having a stronger platform, right? So what have we told you today? We've told you that this is extremely important. Even in developing countries, we told you that very conservative people might not change, right? Even if we criminalize it, they will still have the sexist mindset. But we might be able to change the younger population because they won't be normalized to the idea of sexual misogynistic remarks or casual sexist remarks or slut shaming, all these sort of things, right? Because talking about these things the way they do it now will be criminalized. So we think reducing it to that extent means things might change in conservative countries. We think the sort of crowding out in liberal countries won't be happening. We will be able to go to the root cause that Bunny wanted to talk about, which is essentially going and attacking the person's autonomy and saying whatever. But thank you. I mean, Bunny is difficult. Say something. Yeah. Yeah.
That's why.
All right, let's end the DPM and advance the freedom issue.
Yeah.
Life as a woman is such that 1,000 things inevitably make you suffer every day. But that's just a reality. A law that targets a specific thing at the cost that's massive is like the recent legislation in ABP Council. I mean, we included providing water in the Constitution. I mean, sure, all fine. But the problem is, it's only symptomatic of a problem that's far greater. But in this case, it's much more than that. The trade-off is massive, not just in conservative societies, but also for the movement in general. And that is the case from opening opposition. So I'm going to talk about a number of things in this debate. First, the reason Bunny started with conservative societies is because the problem is the worst, where dogmatism is also the worst. This is the most important part of the debate. There are at least 3 defining features of these societies. And Bunny has talked about these things too. The first thing is they're deep-rooted factors. It's just things people believe and it's been there for so long. The second thing is feminism is already seen as extremely militant as a movement. Any demand that is associated with feminism or associated with something that is too progressive for our society is also deemed as too militant. And the third conclusion, therefore, is where everything, therefore, stemming from that source is seen as anti-tradition. This is the problem that you cannot get rid of, and you have to navigate it within. You have to navigate it. But on the flip side, you have the needs that are massive. The needs being, for example, when a girl grows up in a society like this, the upbringing is such that she is never told she has ownership of her body, that she has agency, or she even has the right to education. Even if she has an education, she has the right to go and get a job, or she has the right to self-esteem, or even she is worth something. So in a society that is so deeply divided between all the things they need, but all the belief system that dictates them, you cannot tell me a policy that is extremely confrontational by definition is going to suddenly change people's minds. And that's why it was extremely important that they tackle with that problem. And the point at which you prosecute this thing, you might be able to improve lives for one or two girls, but you degrade the lives for every girl in general, because the society is now suddenly against all the beliefs held by feminism, which are definitely good. But the problem is now your confrontational attitude means it's something that becomes undesirable, and that's the first massively harmful effect that this side still hasn't dealt with. Now the second problem, therefore, the second problem, therefore, is where these people, these people who are committed, these people who are tall, understand this. In these societies, people who commit acts of misogyny, sexism, or even things like catcalling is not a statistical minority. It's a huge number of people. But these people also commit a number of other harms. And that's why we focus on that instead. Because when you focus on something that in a society, now listen, in a country like Bangladesh, these guys are the moderates. These guys might not be moderate in a more progressive societies. Therefore, when you're dealing with these societies, it is extremely important that you give these moderates to join your cause. The point at which you attack something that is not just fundamental to the lifestyle of these moderates, not necessarily something they believe in or they appreciate it, but they give up to believe it's completely natural, is also the point where you tell these moderates that values of feminism are absolutely anti-traditionalist. And that's where moderates stop. That's where moderates categorically reject everything else that comes from your mind. And that's the problem. So at that point, what happens is traditionalism becomes a cause for sympathy. These are all the things that will definitely happen. But on the other side, there are also things that do happen right now. So some countries have experimented with banning things like catcalling, like Bangladesh. And you know what happened? Girls tried to go to their school and they got catcalled. Their brothers, and this is where agency goes away for a girl, by the way, stepped in and thought it's okay to complain to the police. Except when the girl starts going to the school again, gets thrown with acid, and the life gets and her life is scarred forever. Now, the reason this is extremely important, you might think this is extreme, but the reason this happens is because in that particular society, if you legislate something like this, that girl will never be able to exercise it with any degree of agency. But even if she does, the point at which she has to live in that society for the rest of her life, and also the point at which none of the fundamental belief system has changed, is a point where either she has to remove herself from the society, or if she is within the society, she becomes a pariah. Or she becomes this guy or she becomes the girl for which some guy's life got ruined just in general. So she has to constantly live under this feeling of threat. It's an absolutely it's an atmosphere of fear. It was already an atmosphere of fear, and now it's an atmosphere of absolute fear that these people are forced to live through. So all scenarios mean that life for these people is just by definition worse. Yes, Jasmine.
So in this society that's extremely conservative, where sexism is deeply rooted, don't you think that criminalizing at least would silence the worst sexist behavior in fear of prosecution, as opposed to no punitive incentive on your side?
Sure, I would be okay with that if there was any possibility of perfect prosecution. But the problem with a prosecution, engaging with a social movement, is you also have to tackle the element of belief system and tradition. And you can only go so far. Therefore, the point at which you are going completely against the way, and as your characterization you have to show how you are likely to change the minds of people to any considerable extent, or that the harm to begin with, because that is not happening either under your side. So you're doing something that's tokenistic by definition, at the cost of removing all the moderates that you need to convince under your side. But the general harms under your side are bad enough anyway, because the first thing is there are all these other parallel struggles that also the feminist movement needs to carry on, like things like rape, things like consent, things like prosecution of rape, economic challenges, political challenges.
For all those things, what you need more than law, because you already have laws in all those areas, what you need more than law, especially in these societies and every society, is community's sympathy, community's engagement. And the point at which you do not ask, the point at which the community feels like the feminist movement is no longer engaging or asking them questions that are fundamental to them, is the point at which they divorce themselves from that movement. Therefore, you no longer have any of those benefits. You have to trade those off. But the third reason you also limit this debate, and this is extremely important, is because you severely limit the scope of what can offend a woman. Under your side, a woman can now be offended if she gets catcalled, but a woman can no longer be offended if it's not tangible, if it's not something the law can prove, if it's not something she can prove to the rest of the world. That's a burden a woman should never have to go through. Things like micro-expressions, things like veiled misogyny, things like workplace discrimination, I would argue, are equally or more harmful. But under your side, repression of law means I have to be able to prove that it can be legislated to begin with for me to be able to claim it's something that causes me grievous harm. And that's the third reason you win this debate. That's why these are things you do not legislate. These are things that happens when people change the things they believe to begin with.
Yeah.
Right, I think there's going to be hope. We're going to bring us very much member of that.
14 that seems to concede to every harm that seems to exist in these conservative societies and paint quite a frightful picture in regards to the kind of harms that women face every single goddamn day in their lives, ladies and gentlemen. That their alternatives is either number one, speech policing in social settings, or number two, advocacy in politics, with frightfully lack of defense on the opening opposition, and no sort of comparative made as to whether or not all the loss of gains when it comes to political advocacy, social support, and things like that, in the context of you still, number one, wanting to regulate speech, well, only informally when it comes to people telling each other that that's wrong to say, or political advocacy in terms of saying that you shouldn't be doing these things, ladies and gentlemen, whether you will still be able to maintain that political support, whether you will not push people away on that side of the house, or whether you'll be able to change and make sure that women are protected on your side of the house. We needed a comparative defense in the opening opposition. The first thing I want to point out in the closing government is that there was absolutely no response from the opening opposition in regards to whether or not this amounted to a criminal act. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this debate is about a prosecution in regards to a particular act, whether or not it amounts to something that hurt an individual and whether that victim required redress or not. Even if it may not lead to the best social advocacy, redress for the victims, and legal protection for the deserving, ladies and gentlemen, takes precedence over anything else that you might consider in this debate. Because we don't use victims as a tool of social battering ram, ladies and gentlemen, just because it might create a social impact that's net positive on that side of the house. So we would rather take the comparative of people who have sexism bubbling underneath the surface versus an uninhibited ability for you to make women feel unwelcome in public spaces and feel unsafe in engaging in social circumstances on that side of the house. We think it was fatal for the opening opposition to have no sort of engagement on that side of the house. But what we're going to do in closing government, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're going to take opening opposition at their best. Let's assume that this debate is in regards to social advocacy and how do we get the best outcomes possible in the future and making sure that people's minds are being changed. And we'll tell you why, ladies and gentlemen, reading in my rebuttals, my substantive material, why we get the best social advocacy possible. 4 levels of extension, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost is that we want to first address the concern from the opening opposition in regards to people feeling attacked and people feeling like this movement isn't taking into consideration whether or not they are in fact sexist or not, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, we'll make the radical proposition on closing government that it's more likely than not the individuals in society, under the comparative proposals that are made on the opening opposition, that people will feel more generalized and more attacked on that side of the house. Note the difference, ladies and gentlemen. First, social policing when it comes to speech, policing speech, or telling people that they're evil and things like that. The note of examples, things like you saying things on Facebook and telling people that they're being self-righteous and telling people that they're sexist, misogynistic. It happens all the time in online platforms right now, ladies and gentlemen. These are the kind of social circumstances where oftentimes generalized statements across communities are said. Like, for example, male cisgender white individuals are oftentimes the evil, template people that we use in order to tell people that sexism exists. It is often on these platforms that males or even ladies in general, people who are benign sexist in many circumstances, feel that they are generalized and oftentimes the sexists aren't being targeted in specific on that side of the house. But secondly, even if you're going to talk about political legitimacy or political advocacy on the opening opposition, oftentimes these are the kind of circumstances where political baggage is also dragged within these particular discussions. Which party you support, whether or not these political baggage laden with the sexist remarks of politicians in the past, ladies and gentlemen, are all things that are dragged along with these sort of political advocacy that ends up miring the discussion in regards to sexism and the issues in the comparative in this particular debate. So what do you have on the comparison? At least on our side, even if it goes to court, ladies and gentlemen, there's an apolitical inability for individuals to discuss the issue on those particular platforms. Granted, those discussions will be discussed on online platforms, perhaps be politicized, then there'll be my discussions in that regard. But the comparative is there's a benchmark of issues based on the court's decision, and things are discussed based on substance that start the discussion first and hold that discussion accountable on our side of the house. But what you have on the comparative is a purely kind of like a loose string of consciousness or society that you hope will have a substantive effect on the comparative on that side of the house. That's why we feel like